The old wooden cabin stood alone at the edge of Michigan's frozen wilderness, a forgotten shape swallowed by pine trees and silence. The snow had buried the old road that once led to it, leaving only faint tire marks fading beneath the frost. No neighbors for miles, no cell signal, no sign of life. Just the slow breathing of the forest and the faint whisper of the wind against the walls. The house itself looked fragile, as if one strong gust could turn it into dust. Its windows were fogged from the inside, and the roof sagged under the weight of years in snow. The porch creaked even when no one walked on it, and every corner smelled faintly of wet wood and something older, something like loneliness. Inside, the air was colder than outside. Dust floated like silent snowflakes, moving lazily through narrow beams of pale light. The furniture seemed untouched for decades, a table, a chair, a cracked mirror leaning against a wall. Everything looked paused, as if time itself had stepped out and never returned. Behind the cabin stretched miles of dense forest, endless trunks fading into a white blur. During the day, it looked calm, even beautiful, but when evening came, the forest seemed to breathe. The trees shifted ever so slightly in the wind, like tall, watching figures. The locals rarely came this far anymore. They called the area the Hollow Woods. They said sometimes, in deep winter, people saw something standing between the trees. Not a person, not quite an animal, just a pale figure that never left footprints. And now, Emma, a young photographer with a taste for isolation, had chosen this house to be her home and studio. She didn't know it yet, but the forest had been waiting, and the cabin had never really been empty. Emma arrived just before sunset, her old pickup rumbling through the frozen woods until the path turned into ice. She parked near the crooked porch, breath visible in the cold air, and stared at her new home, the lonely cabin she had seen only in photographs. To her, it wasn't terrifying. It was beautifully quiet. She was a photographer who hunted silence. Cities had become too loud, too alive. Here, she could listen to the stillness, the hum of cold wind through trees, the rhythm of snow falling from branches. She believed that silence could be photographed if you knew where to look. Inside the cabin, her boots echoed on the wooden floor. She unpacked slowly, camera cases, a tripod, old notebooks, a lantern. Each sound, zipper, latch, click, seemed too sharp against the heavy quiet. She noticed a faint smell in the air, like pine and old smoke. It reminded her of forgotten winters. Emma cleaned the window glass with her sleeve. Outside, the forest glowed faintly blue under the snow. The trees stood perfectly still, tall and thin, their shadows like cracks in the ice. It felt like she was being watched, though the woods were lifeless. Later, she set up her camera facing the window. She wanted to capture the way the light faded here, how the sky went from gold to gray, then to black, without warning. As she adjusted the focus, her reflection blinked back at her in the glass. That night, she wrote in her journal, "It's too quiet here. Even the snow feels like it's listening." She smiled at her own words, not knowing how true they would become. Because outside, between the frozen trunks, something else had noticed her arrival, something that had been waiting for someone new to step inside that house again. By the time Emma unpacked the last of her gear, the light had almost died. The sky outside was bruised purple, the kind of color that lasts only a few minutes before vanishing into night. She made tea on a small camping stove, wrapped herself in a wool blanket, and sat by the window. Outside, the forest looked endless, tall, dark trunks fading into white snow. The air was still. No birds, no rustle, not even the sound of wind. The silence was thick enough to feel. Then, between the trees, she noticed movement. At first, she thought it was just a trick of the fading light. But when she looked again, there it was, a deer. It stood perfectly still. Its coat was so pale it almost glowed against the snow, and its body looked fragile, almost too thin to be real. Emma reached for her camera, but stopped. The deer's eyes were what froze her. They weren't the soft brown eyes of a woodland animal. They were black, hollow, and unblinking. Even from that distance, she could feel them meeting hers. She lowered the camera slowly. The deer didn't move, not even to breathe. It just stood there, watching her, as if waiting for something. Minutes passed. The sky turned black. She blinked, and it was gone. Emma leaned closer to the window. There were no tracks, no marks in the snow, nothing disturbed. Just a perfect, untouched layer of white. She laughed softly to herself, almost embarrassed. "You're tired," she whispered. "It's just the light." But when she turned away from the window, the reflection of the glass caught her eye. The faint outline of antlers still shimmered there, like a shadow that hadn't realized the creature had gone. And somewhere deep in the woods, the silence changed, softer, heavier, almost aware. Morning arrived quietly, almost unwillingly. Pale sunlight leaked through the frosted windows, turning the cabin's walls a faint blue. Emma woke to the sound of melting snow dripping from the roof, slow, rhythmic drops echoing through the stillness. She remembered the deer, the white body, the black eyes. It had seemed so real, too real to forget. Pulling on her coat and boots, she grabbed her camera and stepped outside. The air bit her skin like glass. Her breath hung in front of her face, heavy and white. The forest looked innocent in daylight, calm, pure, untouched. She walked toward the trees, her boots crunching softly in the snow. Each step left a clean imprint, deep, sharp, human. But when she reached the spot where she had seen the deer, something felt wrong. The snow there was perfect, smooth as a frozen lake. No tracks, no marks, not even a sign of disturbed powder. It was as if nothing had ever stood there. Emma frowned. She knew what she saw. Her photographer's instinct was sharp. Details, light, movement. She noticed everything. But here, there was nothing to notice. She knelt, brushing her glove gently over the surface. The snow was firm, solid, untouched. Beneath her hand, she thought she felt warmth. No, that was impossible. She pulled her hand back quickly. When she stood again, the forest felt different. The quiet wasn't empty anymore. It was watching her. The trees seemed closer together. She raised her camera and took a photo, one quick click. The shutter echoed like a whisper. She checked the screen. The frame showed only trees and snow, except for a faint shadow between two trunks. A shape, thin, still, too tall to be human, too narrow to be an animal. She blinked, looked up, and there was nothing. But her camera's battery, full moments ago, was now dead. By evening, the forest had swallowed all color again. The sky was pale gray, fading into a darkness that seemed thicker than before. Inside the cabin, Emma sat by her small lantern, reviewing the photos she'd taken earlier. The screen flickered as each image appeared. Snow, trees, empty light. She zoomed in, adjusting focus with quiet, practiced movements. Most of the pictures looked ordinary. Too ordinary. Then she reached the last few shots, the ones from the spot where the deer had stood. Her breath paused. At first, it was only a blur, a faint distortion between two tree trunks. But as she enlarged it, the shape became clear, slender legs, a curved body, and the outline of a head turned slightly toward the camera. The deer. Except it looked different. The body was darker this time, the white coat tinted with something gray, like ash. And the eyes, even though the image was grainy, seemed to stare directly into the lens. Emma frowned, unsettled. She hadn't seen anything through the viewfinder. The forest had been empty, completely empty. She scrolled to the next photo. The deer was closer now, its face sharper. In the following frame, closer still. Each shot felt like a step forward. Her fingers trembled as she reached the final image. It wasn't the deer anymore. The photo showed only the cabin window, her own reflection faintly visible. And just behind it, something pale, standing inside. She dropped the camera, heart hammering, breath short. The lantern flickered once, then steadied. For a long time, she didn't move. She didn't even look toward the window. She only whispered, barely audible. "It's just the light. It's just reflection." But she couldn't shake the feeling that the camera hadn't captured the forest. It had captured her. The next morning arrived dim and colorless. A fog hung between the trees, softening the world into pale gray. Emma hadn't slept. The images from her camera kept flashing behind her eyelids. The deer, the reflection, the thing behind the window. She avoided looking directly at the glass all morning. She brewed coffee, wrote in her journal, even tried sketching. Anything to keep her eyes away from the reflection that waited in every shiny surface. But eventually, curiosity won. She walked to the small mirror hanging beside the door. Its surface was spotted and dusty. She wiped it clean with her sleeve. For a moment, everything looked normal, her tired face, messy hair, pale light behind her. Then, just for a heartbeat, she saw something else. A flicker. Inside her pupils, a shape. Antlers. She blinked, stepped back quickly. The mirror only showed her again, wide-eyed and breathing hard. She leaned closer. The antlers were gone, but the blackness inside her eyes seemed deeper now, as if something was looking out from behind them. She told herself it was exhaustion. The camera flash. Shadows. Logic tried to fix what her senses had already broken. Later, she caught her reflection again in a window. This time, it smiled. A slow, wrong smile, even though she hadn't moved her lips. That night, she covered every mirror in the cabin with cloth. But when she turned off the lantern, the window still reflected faint light, and somewhere in the darkness outside, another reflection blinked back. Emma whispered into the stillness, "You're not real." But the reflection didn't vanish. It simply waited, silent, patient, like something remembering her from long before she arrived. The next day, Emma drove to the nearest town, a place so small it didn't appear on most maps. The main street was a single lane lined with boarded windows, an abandoned gas pump, and a diner that looked decades out of time. Inside, the warmth and smell of coffee felt unreal. The locals stared when she entered, the way people look at someone they've already heard about. She sat at the counter and asked casually, "Do you know anything about a cabin near the Hollow Woods?" The woman behind the counter froze. Her eyes flicked toward an old man sitting by the window. He was silent for a long while before saying, "That house shouldn't be there anymore." Emma frowned. "What do you mean?" The old man's voice was dry, like wind through leaves. "There used to be a hunter who lived out there. Long ago. He caught a deer one winter, a pale one, like snow. He said its eyes were wrong. Said it watched him like a man would. He sipped his coffee slowly. He burned it alive. Thought it was cursed. When spring came, they found the hunter's house empty, his body never found. Just footprints in the ash that led into the woods, and stopped." The diner went quiet. Only the clock ticked. Emma forced a small laugh. "You think that has anything to do with me?" The old man looked at her for a long moment and whispered, "If you saw it once, it's already seen you twice." When Emma returned to the cabin, snow had started to fall again. Thick, heavy flakes that muffled every sound. By the time she stepped inside, the air felt different, heavier. And in the dark reflection of the window, two small black eyes shimmered, waiting. The night came without warning. No sunset, no color, just an instant shift from gray to black. The forest outside was buried under snow, still as a photograph. The cabin creaked softly, like an old chest breathing in its sleep. Emma sat on her bed, her notebook open but blank. Her hands shook slightly, though she wasn't cold. She hadn't turned on the lantern yet. The dim light from the moon slipped through the frosted window, painting the floor in silver streaks. Something about the quiet felt heavier than before. It wasn't absence of sound, it was listening. Like the silence itself had grown ears. She glanced toward the window. At first, she saw only her faint reflection. But then, in the dark beyond, two small dots appeared, black, gleaming, perfectly still. Her breath caught. Eyes. They were too far to belong to anything human, too high to be a small animal. They didn't blink. They just hovered in the white blur of snow, staring. Emma slowly reached for her camera on the nightstand, afraid that even breathing might break the moment. The lens trembled as she lifted it, focusing through the glass. The viewfinder caught them clearly, two black eyes glowing like holes in the world. Then the lens fogged over. When she lowered the camera, the eyes were gone. But in the fog on the glass, two faint shapes had formed, like marks pressed from the outside. She wiped the window with her sleeve, heart pounding. The marks faded instantly. The forest looked empty again. But the silence was no longer patient. It was aware. That night, Emma didn't sleep. She sat awake, watching the window. And though she never saw those eyes again, she couldn't shake the feeling that they had never left, only moved closer, somewhere inside the dark walls. By morning, snow covered the porch in a perfect white sheet. Emma woke to the faint scent of ash, sharp, metallic, almost sweet. She thought it came from the fireplace, but the coals were cold. She wandered through the cabin, exhausted and half awake. That's when she saw it, on the far wall above her work table. A painting. It hadn't been there before. She was sure. She hadn't unpacked any canvases yet. But now, a large wooden frame hung there, nailed perfectly straight. The paint looked wet, still glistening in the dim light. Emma stepped closer. Her heart began to slow in strange, uneven beats. The image showed a forest, pale trees under snow, identical to the view outside her window. And in the center, the deer. It stood facing away, antlers reaching like dark branches. But behind it, barely visible, was another figure. Human. Emma leaned in. The figure's outline was faint but familiar. Her coat, her boots, her stance. It was her. Her hand hovered near the canvas. The closer she got, the stronger that burnt scent became, like wood smoldering deep underground. A drip of paint ran down the frame, red against the white snow of the image. She touched it instinctively. It was warm. Suddenly, the floor creaked behind her. She turned quickly, no one there. Just the same room, quiet and heavy with breathless air. When she looked back at the painting, the deer's head had turned. Now it faced the viewer, the same black, endless eyes staring out from the canvas. She stumbled back, knocking over a chair. The lantern flickered violently before settling again. The painting stayed still, but the eyes seemed to follow her wherever she moved, as if she wasn't just looking at art, but standing inside it. Snow was still falling when they found the cabin. Thick, quiet flakes drifted through the trees, settling over the roof, the porch, the world. The place looked peaceful, too peaceful, like a photograph frozen in time. The local ranger was the first to enter. The door was unlocked, hanging slightly open. Inside, everything was still. The table held a cold cup of coffee, a half-written journal, and a camera resting on its side. The air smelled faintly of smoke and pine. There was no sign of Emma. The ranger called her name, his voice muffled by the walls. He noticed her boots near the door, lined neatly, dry, untouched. A blanket draped over the chair. Everything suggested she had simply stood up and walked out. But the snow outside was perfect, smooth, undisturbed, no tracks leading anywhere. He picked up the camera, curious. The battery light blinked red, but the screen still worked. There were dozens of photos, trees, shadows, snow. And then, near the end, something different. A picture of the cabin itself, taken from outside. The windows glowed faintly with firelight. The next frame, closer. The next, the window. In the final image, a figure stood inside. A woman, pale as snow, with two dark shapes curling from her head, antlers, black as ash. The ranger turned slowly toward the wall behind him, the same wall where Emma had once found the painting. Now it was blank, just a clean, pale rectangle of wood. But when he lifted his eyes to the window, he froze. Outside, through the snowfall, stood a white deer watching him. Its eyes were black and endless. He dropped the camera, and when the flash went off, just for that single second, there were two figures in the window, not one. The forest stayed silent. The snow kept falling, and the cabin, once again, waited. If this story sent chills down your spine, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that walk through the snow, even after the footprints have faded.